transforming lives. Your transformation starts here.
All right, welcome to Transforming Lives podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Patrick Zuniga, an educator, coach, researcher, passionate about unlocking motivation and resilience in both students and teachers. From his early days on the football field in Eastern Washington to the earning multiple degrees in education and history, Dr. Zuniga journey is one of perseverance and discovery. After stepping away from education in 2010 and returned as a substitute teacher, reignited his love for the classroom. Through his research at the University of Kansas, Creighton University, he explored the power of the human connection, cultural learning, and emotional resilience, shaping his groundbreaking dissertation on student motivation in Title I schools. Join us as we uncover hope, efficacy, resilience, optimism, and how it drives transformation in our classrooms. Our next guest is Dr. Patrick Zuniga. I know you're going to get me. Here we go. Our next guest. All right. How did I do there?
Oh, you're getting better every time. It's Zuniga.
Zuniga.
Yeah,
okay,
there you go.
Okay, all right.
Hey, by the way, that intro music was legit, man. I'm sitting there backstage like going, all right, here we go. Let's transform some lives, man.
And interesting enough, the author is a gentleman that kind of mentored sometimes in a local place that I stay. And I asked him, he actually did some work in Washington and Seattle. Okay. So he's a music producer, and he produced that track for me way back when, and I took it and put it on this podcast.
Yeah, it's doing what it needs to do, man. It's doing what it needs to do.
Love it. All right. So how's the weather in Washington?
Well, in Washington, we're cold. You know, I'm in Eastern Washington, so that's about 3 or 4 hours from Seattle. We get more snow, and it's a little bit more frigid in Eastern Washington. So the Cascade Mountains kind of create a division, and the Eastern Washington gets a little more of the, I would call it Midwest-like weather, although it's not quite as cold as the Midwest.
Okay, all right, that's. Let it be known, I don't like cold weather, but
you'd love the summers here. You would love the summers here.
Okay, all right. Okay, perfect. I guess the only thing that I have close, kind of a close reference would be kind of Denver. I've been to Denver. Mm-hmm. Of course, I've been to California, but I guess Denver would be kind of that bridge point for me
that
to kind of
Midwesty feel. Yeah, it's a little more. It gets a little bit hotter than Denver, but we appreciate our agriculture. We're in Eastern Washington, Southeastern Washington here. We got a big agriculture, so lots of farmers. We're very proud of our grapes. So if you're a wine drinker, you probably have had some Washington wine. So, yep, that's Eastern Washington for you.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, you know, it's always great as an educator or even as a podcaster to have a fellow coach on the podcast. You know, my background is that I've coached football. I got some sense and got out of all the other sports and just focused in on football. So I want to start out by asking you, you know, what came first for you, figuring out how to be a great coach or becoming a dedicated teacher?
Well, you know, for me, it was kind of simultaneous. I'm from a background. My family are teachers. My mom, my grandfather, my aunts and uncles, we're all teachers. So it was very common for me to hear teacher talk around the we call it the dinner table, right? Yeah. And so I got used to that, but my brother was a tremendous football fan. So he kind of got me into football. And when I got out of, when I first started teaching, I wanted to kind of explore more into, you know, what makes a student athlete? What motivates them, what inspires them, what drives them to do well in class. And so, like you said, I I had the ability to coach football, and man, I loved coaching football. I still do. I coach football still. And I just wanted to observe the student athletes and say, what makes them tick? And about the same time, I started to research, or I started my first master's degree, where I wanted to look and see if Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences could help us to unlock certain motivations within student athletes.
Yeah.
And boy, I'll tell you what, Tony, that really changed as I started to research it. And I noticed that it wasn't the student athletes and this bodily kinesthetic interest that was driving student participation in assessments. It was the option for choices. Like they could, part of my research was if I designed a lot of different choices for assessments using Gardner's theory of MI, would more students participate in the assessments? And I found that they did. And that really kind of opened up my eyes to the power of multiple intelligences.
Right. Yeah.
But it didn't answer the question of why some student athletes or some students chose to play sports and other students chose not to. And as a coach, Tony, you probably ran into situations where you would really encourage students to play, to participate, or to give it a chance. And, some of the responses were completely reasonable, but others were like, are you sure? Like, oh, the coaches don't like me. And I'm a coach. I'm sitting there going like, no, I like you just fine. Just, I want you to turn out. Or they say like, oh, my parents don't want me to. And I'm like, you're 16 and can you have a conversation? Because you're telling me that you want to. And really what it boiled down to was this concept that just some students didn't want to participate in structured sports. And there shouldn't be, in my opinion, there shouldn't be shame for that. It's just like, we're not interested. You don't have that itch to compete at that high level. Now, here's where it got interesting for me though, Tony. When I asked the students, and I did a pretty good sample of a high school, it was about an 80% sample. And I asked the students how many of them considered themselves athletes. And like 80% of the students who responded said they considered themselves athletes. But then I asked another question, how many of them participated in school sanctioned sports? And it was like 20 to 25% said that they had participated in a school sport. And I said, well, wait a second here.
Right. Yeah.
We have this disparity, right? We have 80% of students that think they're athletes, but only 25 fit the definition. And then I went to, well, how are we impacting their belief of self? We're sitting there saying, we don't think you're an athlete. They're saying, but I am. And I'm like, whoa. We need to re-examine what's going on here. And that kind of just propelled my studies when I went into the University of Kansas. I got a master's of science in education in curriculum and instruction, but I really focused on the concept of cultural transmission and how certain traits like courage, or I learned them as non-cognitive skills,
right?
How those non-cognitive skills went from person to person, and the models I was looking at, from coach to player, or from teacher to student, or even from coach to coach, because I learned a lot from the head coach. I certainly did.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from my assistants that I participated with. I still do. And so those were kind of all these things that really drove me into studying non-cognitive skills, cultural transmission. And then, Tony, when I looked at, this is about 2019, I had finished my second master's and I was back in school observing, like, is my theory true? And I had hypothesized that schools didn't need to exist for learning to continue to happen. And this is just a weird thing, because I'm a teacher and I'm sitting there going I don't know if I'm necessary anymore. The internet had taken so many of the learning or instructional tasks. You can look up whatever you want, but even as this was occurring, I noticed that students kept coming back to school. Even after they had prolonged absences, or I heard that they had unenrolled, they came back. And I said, well, why if school's not necessary and they don't need a school to learn, why are they still coming back? And, I thought, okay, if I'm 12 or 16, why would I keep going back to school? And then I thought, well, the only place you're going to interact with several hundreds of other people your age, between the ages of 5 and 18, it's school. That's it.
Right. Yeah.
And so that was really just kind of like my epiphany of like, wow, maybe we need to reevaluate or think more about what we're doing in school.
Yeah. And that's, I love that, the thoughts that you brought out, because within my mind, I'm looking at kind of our world at this point of looking at, their monumental moments that we have in our history where, technology has changed us, thinking about, for example, Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon has just revolutionized our world from thinking about, we could type in a book right now, type that book in, and we can have access to it like within seconds once we purchase.
Yeah.
Right.
I got a Kindle right over there. Like I want a book. I went to Barnes and Noble yesterday. They don't have it. Guess what? And they're very kind. We can order it for you. And I'm like, I got a Kindle at home.
Right,
order it for myself. And I'm like, I want to support local businesses, but I also want my product right now.
Yes. That's the thing. Thinking about how there has been a shift in education from, at one point, I remember encyclopedias, and now you got Wikipedia.
Yep.
It's just a total difference in our approach. So I'm invested in this conversation because you're bringing up a interesting point of finding for students to find this reason to come to school. If they can learn outside of the walls of a school district, a classroom, what's drawing them in? So I'm you got me invested. Like, I want to find out what happened. I know we got another point we're trying to get to,
well,
but
I'll just summarize it. So I went the best years of my life, or some of the best years of my life, I was in a very small town, but we always looked forward to one thing, and it happened every year, and everybody my age looked forward to it, and it was the county fair, right? The carnival came to town, the rodeo was in town, new people were in town, and that's how I think that students view school. It's like going to the mall, or it's like going to a field trip, where it's like the thing is, it happens every day. And so we try and introduce new learning concepts. In fact, we don't just try to do it. There's goals, right? We have to have literacy goals, like teachers, and we do a poor job of sharing this. I think we are under a tremendous amount of pressure to meet these goals.
Yep.
And so the students come to school. We want them to come to school, right? That's the first thing they need to be. You got to be present.
Yep.
But then they come to school and they're like, all right, I'm doing it. I'm here. And you're like, no, you're just here. We need to start learning now. No, I came to school. And so really we need to look at, man, how are we using our time in school? In my opinion, if I were in a dreamland just designing things up, like, can we create cross credits? So if students participate in a school sport, they can get PE credit, or can we create a history of art class? So students that aren't interested in history can at least get an art credit or a history credit through this art history class. The ideas exist. And again, this goes back to some of the things we talked about off camera. State to state, I can't say in Washington State this will work. In Mississippi, it'll work too, because I just don't have any perspective on Mississippi. And Tony, like you shared with me earlier, you don't have much perspective on Washington either. And that's one of the things that your series, I think, is going to uncover, which, man, I think I'm so excited for all the people you're going to interview for this.
Right. And the conversation is just like now, where you have questions scripted out that you're asking, but the development of the conversation is more powerful. It is more, and that's the goal of the podcast, is to have, authentic, candid conversations to an extent. Right. There's another lane that definitely not trying to travel down right now, but it's a conversation where you're bringing out, if 80% of the students that you sampled thought of themselves as athletes, then where's the gap between that 80%, and I think you said 20%, that actually participated in the sports and school sponsored sports? Like, that's normal in Mississippi. Okay, I will put it to you like that. That's a normal. There's a disconnect there, and I can have my personal thoughts on it, but that's about the same numbers. I haven't actually did it, but just kind of thinking off the top of my head, that's about the same. Yeah.
Well, and then if you dig into that study, and I did it for my Washington State professional teaching certificate, it went further, and this is the part that kind of got me uncomfortable, because I'm a coach, man. I understand why these things exist, but we actually have a mechanism, or at least the schools that I've taught at have a mechanism to show you that this disparity exists. So it's not just theoretical. We're like, oh, you participate in sports, you're a student athlete. You do the athletic code. You don't? Oh, okay, nothing for you. And the students make sense of that right away. Oh, you're holding me to a higher standard, but don't we both have to graduate?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I found common ground there, because we do hold those students at a higher ground, those athletes, those student athletes at a higher level. But there was something I've taught in the Mississippi Delta. And one of the things at that particular school that I taught at, it was about 2 years, is setting high expectations, and setting those high expectations, not just for athletes, but for the children that were in the school, had a major impact on their time there, and even those moving forward. So yeah, I'm with you. I can definitely see that.
Yeah. So in that study, I called it perceptions of bias, because what really also intrigued me was the student non-athletes, the students who didn't participate. They also felt that the school was biased against them. So both groups felt that the other group had bias or against them. So the student athletes were sitting there going like, well, every time we fail, we get held accountable and they don't. And the student non-athletes are sitting there going like, they get so many options to pass, we don't get any. And I'm sitting there going like, you guys are like going to the same movie, but watching two different movies.
Love that analogy. It's going to show up somewhere down this journey of the 50 educators. I love that analogy. Love it. Yeah.
So anyway, that was that study, and that really got me interested into more about motivation. And so that had me go to Kansas, and I studied non-cognitive skills a little bit more there. And then eventually I got to Creighton, where I studied the turnover and burnout rates, which was what kind of prompted me to contact you to say, hey, I'm from Washington. Let's see if we can collaborate here.
Right. No. Yeah. So I'm definitely looking forward to it, and we've kind of touched on this, but and I think maybe if we can touch on this for a couple of minutes. What was that moment in class that made you change your instruction? Like, what was that?
Okay, so, and I know that you and I chatted a little bit about this off camera, or setting up for this, but I taught at a really, really great high school, and I had some just outstanding students, and they've gone on to do some pretty amazing things. But I remember they were just, the students that I interacted with were very high level, and they seemed to be wanted, just give me the knowledge. So one day, one unit, I was just like, all right, I'm going to prepare a college-like unit, and I'm just going to challenge them. And I got in there, and I can't remember. I was trying to think, okay, I know it was in spring, so maybe I was doing the Industrial Revolution, but trying to deliver it via a Christmas carol. And I was upstairs, or I was up front lecturing, trying to say like Ebenezer Scrooge is a metaphor for and here are these ghosts. And I just remember seeing these two students who were really good students, really great students, high level. I'm not sure 4.0. It doesn't really matter. They were just good students and good people.
Right. Yeah.
And they rolled their eyes and did a deep breath, like, we are bored. And I knew that they were such respectful students that they would never say that to me. In fact, I had anticipated that their respect for not just me, but the school in general, the learning process was so high that they may not be honest that they were bored. But I saw it. I saw them rolling their eyes. I saw them. And I just thought to myself, I wonder if I'm wasting their time. And did I lose you, Tony? I'm wondering if I'm wasting their time. And they came in, and as I watched them work, I decided I got to quit doing so much history, and I need to do more life. And really that's where that came into. I'm going to teach these students, or I'm going to give them an opportunity to make decisions as learners, not just take notes as students of history. And so we got into more of, okay, you have several different choices of how to use your time today. How are you going to use it? And so the students started to make sense of all that kind of stuff, of how to make decisions, set priorities, analyze their own grades, and set their own timelines.
So describe for us your academic journey and how you ended up studying emotional labor and psychological capital at Creighton University. I'm curious to hear about this.
Okay, so football coaching, it's one of those deals, and I had a great head coach, and he had this statement that it meant something to me. He would say, I have a master's degree, and if I'm confused about all this, how do you think the kids feel?
Right.
And
Yeah.
whenever he'd say that, I was like, oh, that's a really good point, because we're sitting here trying to solve problems, and we're the big brains. We're the people in the room that can, that we're confusing ourselves. How is a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old or 16-year-old or
Yep.
8, how are they going to do with it?
I agree. Yeah.
And so I kind of had that thought in my mind when I started looking at the achievement gap. And that's one of my big passions. One of the things that got me to study education was, this achievement gap. And in my area, I'm half Mexican, and in my area, the achievement gap can mean Hispanics.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a personal thing to me. And so I wanted to, use the gifts that I was blessed with, my understanding of sports and my knowledge of motivation. And I wanted to see, maybe there's another way we can look at the achievement gap. Not to say that the work that has been going on isn't valuable. It certainly is, but maybe we can do other things. And so I began to reflect on that statement. If I have a master's degree and I'm confused, how do you think the kids feel?
Yeah.
And so I said, maybe we're just confusing the teachers. Maybe we're just making it so the teachers cannot feel effective. And what's happening is the results of our tests and the results of our assessments are showing not that the kids aren't learning, but that just everybody's frustrated.
Correct.
And and so I wanted to, instead of focus on things that had already been studying, if we did this program, if we increased minutes here, if we did this, I didn't want to do that. And I stayed away from arguments about money. I'm a teacher, and if you're going to say, hey, we need to put more money in front of you, I'm not going to argue against you.
Right.
But I wanted to say it's something you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of money on to develop. And my theory had come from a lot of different places, but I'm an 80s kid. And in the 1980s, we really studied the impact of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so I was like, if character means something, then we have to study what character is to really indicate what we're trying to grow. And that got me into non-cognitive skills, Tony, and it got me into things that we're doing right now. I don't know if you're going to be able to edit in the frustrations that we just went over. Like, you're having an internet option, you're trying to problem solve it by using your iPad, and you want to know what we're solving it. This is resilience right here.
Right. Absolutely.
We're keep going. We're not frustrated. We're sending emails back and forth saying, hey, Paul, this has never happened before. And I'm saying, hang in there, we'll get to it. But that's what happens. It's two people collaborating to put forward a good product. And that's no different than a student, right? A student, they're not a product. They're not something I own. In fact, I've been told by a number of different people, like, I'm giving you my most prized possession.
Yeah.
I better make it better. And I'm like, I come from a family where if I'm borrowing your car, I'm going to fill it up. And you know what? If I have time, I might go wash it too. And so I really wanted to say, hey, we can develop ourselves. And we can make ourselves into, and again, this gets into sports, right? One of the people that I looked up to was like Barry Sanders or Pat Tillman, and say like, hey, these are guys that got put into really, really weird situations.
Yeah.
And what did they do with it? Well, they did the best that they could.
Yeah.
You didn't hear them complain a lot. You didn't hear them making noise about how unfair things felt to them. They just went and did. And so I said, hey, if we can isolate that mentality, if we can say, hey, all we have to do is get to work, then we're going to start making differences. And so that took me from the University of Kansas to Creighton, where I shifted from studying non-cognitive skills and cultural transmission at Kansas to studying emotional labor and emotional intelligence and psychological capital at Creighton, because if what I was trying to isolate was true, or if it existed, I guess I should say is a better way, then I should just be able to find it everywhere. And so the first thing I said was, if there is something in these schools, then the first thing I should probably find is hope. If hope exists in schools, then we got a chance. And so I did a really, it was practicing methods, but I did a paper on, does hope exist in these schools? And I found that it did. And so when I found hope did, I was like, well, I bet you there's other things that exist. And at that point, I had just become introduced to psychological capital. So I spent another kind of year studying what psychological capital was and kind of designing questions to learn more about how the teachers at these schools not learn how they understood psychological capital. That wasn't the point. It was to see if it existed in these schools, which it did. And psychological capital is based on this acronym HERO. It stands for hope, self-efficacy, which a lot of people associate with the confidence or a belief in oneself,
Yeah.
resilience, and optimism. And if you understand yourself enough, if you're aware enough to see that you are, there's a number of different times in a week, I would say, where you have situations where those mentalities can be activated. Here's an example. You give a student a reading test. They do really well on the reading test. How are you going to react? And you have to react one way or another. You can't, if they did really well on it, you're not just going to give them the results back and say, here you go. There has to be some kind of recognition. But the other way it happens too, right? You have a student who has been doing really well, and all of a sudden they don't do very well.
Yeah.
How are you going to react to that?
Yeah.
And so I just kept going. Like if teachers know why they're reacting in the way they are, then they can help to regulate their emotions, which can lead to, which I thought could lead to endurance. It could lead to perseverance. And ultimately, there is evidence that it showed that having awareness of emotional situations and being able to place how you really feel in context to how you're expected to feel. If you can make the difference between that, then I think we're going to find that you're becoming more emotionally intelligent.
And that's the part that when we talk about emotional intelligence, I'm a grown man, and I'm going to say this publicly. We all have emotions, but I became more aware of, hey, this is what I'm feeling. Once I got older, got kids, it's like, okay, now this is what these are called feelings. Yeah. These are emotions. Like, where did they come from?
Yeah.
Although they've been there the whole time, I was able to acknowledge, hey, I'm truly feeling this way.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're touching on an interesting point that I found, and that is the value of our colleagues, right? Not all your colleagues are your friends. That's a thing I think we can all understand. In fact, there are some colleagues who are like your rivals. Like they don't want to see you do good, and you maybe don't want to see them do so well. But there are colleagues who are your friends who help you understand that you are feeling something emotional, that it is okay to have certain reactions to certain things. I think with if we talk about grade inflation, right? And the teacher is sitting there managing the grade book, and they understand the statistics, and they know little Johnny or little Sally got a 35% in class, and there's no logical or reasonable way you can explain a passing grade. And yet somebody comes and says, by the way, can you change that grade to passing? And like, what, all your authority is gone. Yeah. And like, how are you supposed to feel about that? Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great. It's like, no, most teachers are like, well, you just messed up my entire grade book. Now everybody who's got a 35% can make an argument that they should be passing. And you're like, well, you need to make sense of that within that emotional intelligence. And your friends at work, just like you're doing right now, Tony, you're like, yep, I've been through that, man. I've been through that. But you're affirming my point of view, right? You're like, yep, that does exist. That happens from time to time. And that makes me feel better. And then it gets into this, like, I've done my work in the classroom, and I'm more than willing to be vulnerable to you, Tony. We've connected, but I don't know you, right? Yeah. So if you get to that level of you can be vulnerable, well, that means that there's a higher level of trust. Like we're both educators, we're both coaches. I trust this project. I want to contribute to the betterment of it. And then we get into, hey, we can build this team. We can make this collaboration effectively because we are starting right now with trust.
Yeah. And trust is an important part of any, not just relationally, but organizations, because once you lose trust, everything else is out the water.
It's over.
It's over. Like, this is like, I understand it from the standpoint of a coach. Just wants a head football coach, and you can put an initiative out that, hey, you make so many workouts, hey, you're gonna get gloves, shirt, and and you got this exclusive club. But then there's moments where you don't follow through with it. Now you kill the morale of your players, and it's like, although they put the work in, but the ultimate goal was to receive the gloves. right?
Right.
Those gloves, like they got to have the gloves,
Right.
and they didn't get them. So I recognize that.
And I'll take it a little bit further, like the helmet stickers, right? The little helmets, the decals that you get. And I got my head football coach again. He's now one of my really good friends. But I remember my senior year, they gave out a sticker that said "Mad," and the head coach said, "Hey, this is going to stand for mom and dad because that's really who you play for." And I thought to myself, I like that story, but my mom and dad are divorced. But then quickly thereafter, he said it could also stand for make a difference because that's what you do on the football field. And I was like, give me every one of those stickers. That's how quickly my mind changed from, it should mean mom and dad. And I'm like, I'm not a part of this too. It could also mean make a difference. And I was like, I want all of them. I want all the stickers because I'm going to make a difference. And so it can be as simple as that, but you create modes for recognition.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing. And as you're talking, like my mind is processing where we think of the bigger recognitions. Maybe it's at the end of the 9 weeks to acknowledge, the student made all A's, or maybe some acknowledgement on the thing in Mississippi is, on your state test, acknowledgement. I'm sure that's a cost.
Yeah, we got that.
But it was something simple that I did in a particular school district that I was working in. And, I didn't think that I just tried it. It was the WC, well, I call them WCW. It's WW.
Yeah, come on now. Give me Stinger, man. Give me Diamond Dallas Page.
Right. So I went to Walmart and I bought those belts, right? This was before the time of, now we see it on the sideline, the turnover chain. Yeah. And I bought the
hype man here, Coach Tony, the original hype man. I love it.
And the thing about it was that, I built competition within the room because it was like, if it works on the football field, why can't it work in the classroom?
And you want to know what, Coach Tony? The kids do it anyways. They do it anyway. They compete with their best friends. They compete with the person across the hall. They inherently know who the best reader in the room is, and they wonder what score they got.
Yes.
They compete it. They create this competition anyway. Tell me more about these belts, though, Coach Tony.
Right. No. So it was basically to build the engagement up within in the classroom. It was, you set the goal. I just related it back to football of saying, hey, we want to see the score on the scoreboard, right? So you had those interactive games and this math, and I saw a difference in the morale of the students. And it was like they invested in their energy into the lesson because they knew at the end, I have to be able to compete for my team. Mm-hmm. And I want to put forth a better effort because I'm going to let my team down. And listen, the team that won, all I did was, hey, you get to take a picture with the belt. They put the belt on their shoulder, take a picture, send it to the principal. And it was like, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I like similar story. Football camps, used to go to football camps in the summer, and I'm at Eastern Washington University, and back in
Eastern
the
Washington
2010s, they had a pretty good squad back then. And here I see Junior Adams, who's, by the way, is the offensive coordinator for the Oregon Ducks now. Junior Adams is coaching wide receivers for Eastern Washington. And Torrey Hunter is coaching the defensive backs. Now, he played in the NFL too. Yeah. And the defensive backs and the wide receivers have a rivalry. And they are celebrating their rivalry in front of all the campers. And it's a friendly rivalry, right?
Right. Yeah.
That engagement. Like, oh, you're a defensive back. Well, I'm a wide receiver. Well, I automatically don't like you. And we take that further, right? Because if we look at our classrooms, we are a subculture of the school. So
correct.
If the school is succeeding, then the assumption could be, well, your subculture is probably succeeding because that builds on itself. And conversely, if the culture of the school isn't doing so hot, then I bet you could go to some classrooms and say, how are you contributing to the culture of the school? And I think when you look at the goals that are set, right? So we have goals set by the Department of Education, that's federally. Yeah. Our state has an OSPI, so that's our state goal. So we have state goals. Then our district has goals for us. So we have our district goals and we have our school goals. So these goals have already been set. So then the question is, how close can you get to getting to these goals? Because I'm like, I'm at a Title I school. We can sit down and we can look at the statistics. You can tell me what you think the goals should be or what you think my success rate should be. but I can tell you what my day's like, and I can tell you what I think my success rate is going to be. So let's just sit down and have a conversation about it. And hopefully we're moving to that way, because like you said, in those subculture competitions, right? So I have two scores that I'll share. I'll share the top reading scores, so that the top 11, call it the elite 11 or the great 8, I forget what I use. But then I also have the top gainers, and I don't do points, right? So it's what percentage you went up in comparison to where you started.
Yeah.
So, it's not equal. So I want to isolate the highest growth, not who has them. I'll isolate the top scorer and the highest growth. And that gets into well, so what if so-and-so had 25 carries? Like, well, they're getting 10 yards a carry. That's 250 yards, right? Well, what if so-and-so got 25 carries? They only had 4 yards. It's like, well, they still got 100 yards. It's the same amount of yardage.
Yeah.
And that's really what I want to get to, is like, it's not the end result. That's going to happen sooner or later for you. It's the effort you put into it.
Right.
And I think when we talk about belts or sharing scores or any kind of recognition, especially the tangible kind, you're getting into, okay, what does that represent in your subculture? And it sounds to me like Coach Tony, like you were getting that all figured out with how to celebrate math scores, but using friendly rivalries.
Right. Yeah. This is the types of conversations that I feel like educators, need to listen to, involve themselves, because the goal of the podcast was not just to go and on this tangent of just talking to educators. I think, people can do that, but I want it to be where you have these authentic conversations where, one, you're connecting with someone in a totally different state from you, and then you can take that information and that inspires others to live a transformed life in a sense of to help transform their school. So absolutely, this is good information. So you've touched on the psychological capital, the emotional labor. Can you kind of pull us in a little bit more on what you found out through your studies?
Oh, sure. So there's a lot of, I call them incongruencies in school. And I think as you become more of a veteran teacher, you get more experience. You just get used to these incongruencies. So for example, I mentioned grade inflation earlier. Guess what? Grade inflation is probably going to happen. It's probably going to continue to happen. What am I going to do about it? And that gets us into, there's other incongruencies, right? You're told have a rigorous curriculum, but when a student starts to struggle with it, make it easier for them. Okay.
Which one you want?
Yeah, exactly. Or, the whole he said, she said, a student is misbehaving in the classroom. They get sent to a write-up is done. The student says that's not the way it happened. The principal doesn't know which way to go, or the parent in some cases.
Right. Yeah.
Those are going to happen anyway. They've happened. I got my first job in 2000, and they've happened every year that I've taught. So it's like maybe I just became used to them. Maybe I just became jaded or calloused. I don't know. But the psychological capital aspect of it is, it says no matter what the incongruency, you can still meet the goal. No matter, so we get into hope. And hope means that you understand. The first thing I tell people is try not to talk about hope as a noun. It's not something you carry around. Hope is a verb. It's something you do. So if you hope somebody does something, then the initial thing is well, you should go do it too. You have that thought of well, somebody should do something about that. And it's go do it. Go do it. And so that's well, I wish that we could teach this differently. Then design it. Go give it a shot. So the hope is you believe that you can achieve your goal, and you know how to do it. Efficacy is just, hey, you understand yourself, and you're not going to set unrealistic goals, or you're not going to predicate your goal attainment on skills you don't have. And that can include networking, Tony. So I'm not a podcaster. You are. So here we are collaborating, and I'm admitting, hey, I don't have the self-efficacy to do a podcast right now, but I certainly can contribute to yours. So that self-efficacy part is, can you make it happen in your classroom without any help? Because no one's going to come and save you, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then the resilience is, if you're going to set that goal, you got to get through it. You got to keep going. Because who are the people that are actually trying to derail you? And this is where it gets crazy. It's the students. Some students just get a big kick out of watching you stumble, and it's not personal. But some students it can be personal, but most of the time it's not. So it's really you're fighting yourself. Like, can you overcome being ridiculous? Can you overcome having, like we talked about, a bad first period? And then optimism is, of course, you can. Of course, and it's a personal positive experience, and it's pervasive. You're not optimistic first hour and then pessimistic second hour. You try to be optimistic the entire day.
Entire time, right? Yeah.
And then then psychological capital is kind of new. And so there's some other things that I have this book right here, so I'll just show it. Oh wait, you can't see it. Anyway, it says Psychological Capital and Beyond, and this is by Fred Luthans, Dr. Carolyn Joseph Morgan, and Bruce Oviolo. I probably said that name wrong. And it gets into some other possible psychological capitals. So things like creativity, flow, mindfulness, gratitude, forgiveness, spirituality. There's a lot of things that we have in our hearts and minds that can just help us be better. And really that's what it comes down to is, can you do these things with limited resources? And, I'm like, who probably wrote about this the best? And this gets me into trouble because I'm a literature teacher. I'm like, you just got to read The Count of Monte Cristo, man. That guy had one person helping him. And we have one thing helping us, the internet. That's it. I mean, you can use the internet to get smarter at so many different things if you're willing to use it ethically.
Yeah. And that's from a recent interview with Adam Welcome.
I saw that one, by the way. That was a really good interview. I'm excited to watch all of these interviews, to be really honest with you.
Right. So, you do your research, and I say this every time, like with your guests, one of the main things as a podcaster is that you have to do your research to know who you're having on. But then in this case, my first time hearing psychological capital. So it's like, all right, I remember my psych class that was in my freshman year of college. That's a long time ago. I don't necessarily remember. And you said it earlier about being vulnerable enough to allow the guest to speak freely, because you don't want it to be where, you're kind of setting those rigid boundaries, because again, everyone can go on the internet and get information.
Yep.
But you want to make sure that you streamline it enough to, and the thing about transformation is it's not just about information, it's about application too.
Absolutely.
So yeah, getting that information. So hearing what you're talking about right now is definitely very helpful in a sense to the life of the podcast and to my life as well. So it's good to hear what the kids would say, maybe an old saying, what you're putting down right now.
Right. I'm feeling what you're putting down. Yep. I guess. Well, that's like you're back to like the 2000s. Like those are the good times, Tony. The good times.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at, this, when we talk about transforming lives, we've touched how, when we think about classroom instruction, how you've observed yourself and other educators. When we talk about transformation, we looked at, psychological capital. Is it any more that you want to kind of bring out how psychological capital relates to teaching and learning? Or
Well, I think, I could go on for a long time about this study, but I think what it comes down to is, I think what us veteran educators probably have already figured out. It's you can buy a lot of things for your classroom to make things seem easier. And the things we buy aren't necessarily always the best things to bring forward. So if there's a challenge within the curriculum, or there's a challenge within delivery of instruction, you have two really good people you can go to. The first is your colleagues. Your colleagues
Right.
can help you out. But the second is yourself. And, that positive self-talk, that the journaling, whatever you need to do to remind yourself that you are your greatest ally. That's important. I try and teach this to students. It's the old literature of person versus self. Almost every conflict you're going to get into is going to be you versus yourself, at least first. And then once you figure out that, then you can just start to decide how you're going to overcome those challenges. And of course, you're going to learn like person versus self first. There are some things that are person versus society. And it's like, yes, but if you learn person versus self first, you'll understand your role in society. And, so those are the things that I try and get to. And I know that I've talked to you about thinkingtask.com. And those are going to be some of the ways that I try to provide learning opportunities for others, because these aren't things that I made up. These aren't things that that I've just created or that I hypothesize. These are things that you can go back and you can study, and you can say, oh, the flying tigers. Oh, what kind of psychological capital did they use to have such a great kill ratio in World War II? And then you could study it, because I don't know the answer to that, but that's certainly something I would be interested in looking at. But I go through and I just go through history. My first degree was in history. So I go through in history and pop culture, and I just say, okay, where are some stories we can talk about to learn more about psychological capital?
Right. No, that's good, because that's basically when we look at leadership. That's pretty much when I think about those leaders that I read, that I listen to, that's essentially what's happening, where you're trying to provide light for them, being in, not necessarily in a dark situation, but being able to see their way forward. Because even for children, like if you ask a 10th grader, what are you going to do when you go to college? I don't know. I just want to get out of high school.
Like, I'm just going to do what's next.
Right. So that's good to hear, because we need to make sure that it's not just a job of us to teach our students, but it's our job for us to have this collaborative experience with each other, because it makes no sense to reinvent the wheel. I was looking at something on social media about, it said, just stop reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, like it works just fine. It works just fine right now. It has for the past couple thousand years. We're good.
Yeah. So you've touched on the future projects that you have. Yep. So kind of how we'll kind of close this out is you have a 2-minute warning, and of course you relate to the 2-minute warning.
I'm checking my timeouts. I'm looking at the field possession, getting a look at the time and the score. Got to see if my mom's still in the stands.
Right. I love it. I don't get this conversation a lot.
Well, I mentioned the line to you, Tony, and I think you kind of liked it because you asked me to talk about it. We become the things we do. And, I love music. And so I heard that from the band Third Eye Blind. There's a song called Blinded. And he says, we become the things we do. And, I had shared with you that I went through burnout. And when I began to write the ship, I reflected on why I burnt out, or why I think I burnt out. And it was, if I were to put, if I were to like examine myself, I'd be like, well, Pat, you had some emotional labor, and instead of making sense of it, you just got angry, and you just let it become self-destructive. And really that is what I want to tell people. It's like, yes, you're going to experience things that are going to prompt you to consider moving out of education. Most teachers do.
Yeah.
But if you activate that psychological capital and rely on your colleagues and friends to help you with perspective, because oftentimes it's not personal. It's hard to explain. They're very unique moments that you may or may not have locus of control over. They may, in fact, happen to you. But there's that old saying, right, in coaching. And I think this was affiliated with John Wooden, although it's like all quotes, you never know who said it first. Life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react.
Absolutely.
And if you have negative things that happen to you or compel you to feel emotional dissonance, you got to right the ship. And that gets into reflection. It gets into contemplation, into patience, things that make people incredibly uncomfortable. And I would also add, like, if you're feeling stressed or anything like that, begin to envision your sick days as kind of like mental health days. And some districts actually have that, but don't feel bad if you have to use those for them, because sometimes we do just need some time to just unwind. And again, I think, say thinkingtask.com, like, I'm trying to get that to be used as subplans, because I think one of the ways that we can mitigate turnover and burnout is to create less of a stigma around taking sick days. Although, and the research is showing absenteeism and increased sick days, people taking time out away from work to get sick days, it's a huge indicator that something isn't right. So if you're a leader in education, pay attention to those things. And really, this gets into like this entire emotional labor. It's going to happen to you. You're going to go through it, and the comfortable thing to do is to blame or to create excuses.
Yeah,
it's not my fault because, or I couldn't react that way because, and it's like, no. You have to develop self accountability, and that, especially right now, is so uncomfortable to people. And ultimately, I think it's most uncomfortable to yourself, because who are you letting down? You're letting yourself down.
Right. Yeah.
But other people can remind you, and that makes it worse. And so when we look at how you react, Tony, so when this thing went off and I was sitting there and you weren't sure what was going on, you're like, hey, I'm going to try a few different things. We chose to keep going, and that's perseverance, right? Because the opposite of that, or an antithetical emotion, is apathy. I don't really care about that. I don't really care about this. I can log off and send you an email and say, hey, sorry, we ran into that. But we exercise perseverance and resilience, right? You said, hey, I'm going to try this other technique to get us to connect one more time, and it worked. And so you got tough, and we didn't quit. We didn't get into resignation. It's just like, no, I believe in this project, Tony. I trust you. You thought I would stay on this, and so, from that way, we displayed it.
Right.
And so, really, we just have to expect that these things are going to happen, and not get frustrated that they do.
Right. So that's good. That's really good, because one of those indicators for educators is if they are starting to use up their sick days, it's something major going on, and you have to check the culture and the climate of your building to see, why is this person missing, and it has to go through that leader's desk to sign it off. I don't know how some districts work, but that's something that you have to have a conversation about. So, man, these are some great points that you brought up concerning, us as educators. I don't want to say just educators, because I'm an educator. Is one that brings out. So, again, I am thankful that you took the time to share on this platform. We did persevere through our little moments. And in fact, as you were talking, I'm thinking through how I'm going to edit this particular podcast and use those moments, because they're necessary as a teaching tool. So my mind is going to be working.
You're going to have some fun. You're going to have some fun with that.
Right. But to point out, and I forgot to say, I was going to say this earlier, going back to Adam Welcome podcast episode, my camera went out.
Oh my.
It's like, so this camera that's sitting here, I'm looking at him, and it's like, my side goes out. So I quickly hit the side, made him the center of the attention on the screen. And I'm like, no way. So then I have to switch to my other computer over here. It's like, okay, this is not COVID right now. This is not online live. This is not happening right,
man. We've been through it. Yeah, you got a new project going on. So you know what they say about that. You start a new ambitious project, everything's gonna go wrong.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Well, again, I'm thankful, and that you shared. I'm going to drop you in the background real quick, and I'm going to close this out, and we can get on, after this and have a couple of minute conversation. I'll appreciate it.
Yep.
All right.
Your thing.
Drop you. All right, guys. So this particular episode is powerful, right? So the conversations were worthy of repeating. When we look at psychological capital, although this is a new word for me, it shouldn't be a new word, but when you look at the deeper parts of it, I can relate to it. When you look at hope, when you look at resilience, when you look at efficacy, when you look at optimism, these are things that have to happen in our lives, and we have to push through. So again, guys, I'm sure that this is just the start of it. On the track that we're going with 50 educators from 50 states, this is just a start. Again, guys, thank you for listening. Hit that subscribe button. We'll see you later.